The West Philippine Sea Newsletter, Volume 18, ASEAN and East Asia Conference, and China's ignoring U.S. warnings. The West Philippine Sea has been surprisingly quiet over the past few weeks as a lull has settled over the rivalry between China and the Philippines. The Chinese and Philippine governments did report an uneventful Philippine resupply operation to the BPS Sierra Madre at the Second Thomas Shoal. The Philippines and China are still honoring an agreement that the Philippines will notify China in advance when they conduct a resupply operation in their own exclusive economic zone. And in return, the Chinese will let the mission proceed with the stipulation that Philippines, will not deliver construction supplies to the Sierra Madre. The apparent reduction in tensions, for which China is the instigator of the clashes, is not due to a change in policy, but to China not wanting its aggressive activity to overshadow their presence at the East Asia and ASEAN summits. The 19th East Asia Summit took place last week, October 16th through the 11th, in Laos. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, hosted the meeting, merging their respective summits into a single meeting location, with many of the same participants attending both conferences. The relatively quiet conduct of the Chinese in the region appears to be a continuation of a tactic they used earlier this year to prevent China's aggressive behavior from disrupting the ASEAN Regional Forum Foreign Ministers meeting in July 2024. Prior to the July meeting, the Chinese negotiated an agreement with the Philippines to quiet tensions in the Second Thomas Shoal after its Coast Guard attacked and captured Philippine sailors attempting to resupply the Sierra Madre. China negotiated an agreement prior to the July meeting as a diplomatic maneuver to prevent its aggressive activities in the South China Sea from becoming the primary topic of the discussion. Prior to the summit, China had taken similar measures, but there was an incident with Vietnam in the South China Sea where China's Coast Guard seized a Vietnamese fishing boat and physically assaulted the crew with iron rods. The summit brought together many regional rivals, as it included officials from the United States, including Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Russia, led by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, China, led by Chinese Premier Li Qiang, India, led by Prime Minister Modi, the Philippines, led by President Marcos Jr., and so the Chinese Premier Li Qiang apparently came prepared with a number of economic initiatives to flex its power in the region, which included lifting of the final sanctions against Australia and upgrading a number of trade deals within the region. China's actions served as a reminder to the rest of the region of its economic influence, a stark contrast to the United States and its allies, who made no such offers and were caught off guard by the Chinese premier. China quietly emphasized that it was offering the region its version of prosperity, while in its assertion that the U.S. and its allies were spending their energies creating a patchwork of alliances that, in the Chinese self-serving view, was promoting militarism and instability in the region. President Marcos Jr. of the Philippines bristled at the actions of the Chinese government at the conference, offering so many economic agreements to the region and presenting itself as the supporter of Asian stability, but said that China was taking no responsibility for the turmoil it has caused his nation and the region by its illegal claims and actions in the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea. President Marcos challenged Premier Li's actions when he addressed reporters, asserting that one cannot separate the economic cooperation from political security. This is a clear reference to the Chinese premier's practice of offering economic gifts to the region without addressing any of the underlying security concerns in the region. The Chinese responded by stating that they settled differences based on, quote, historical facts, end quote, seemingly referencing their dubious historical claims over the South China Sea. President Marcos Jr. also urged the ASEAN nations to persist in formulating a maritime code of conduct in Asia with the aim of securing an agreement that China would accept, thereby averting the frequent clashes between the ASEAN summits. In 2022, ASEAN agreed to prioritize this agreement, but it has not made any significant progress. Marcos highlights that the organization is still unable to reach a consensus on the definition of, quote, self-restraint, end quote, due to China's use of water cannons, ramming ships, and harassing fishermen in any country that does not acknowledge China's undisputed ownership over the most of the South China Sea. The Philippines and the United States do have a defense treaty that dates back to 1951, and it does provide the Philippines with a significant level of security in its routine clashes with China. The problem lies in the United States' failure to provide the Philippines with clear guidance on the level of tolerance they should expect from China before the U.S. takes action on their behalf. China has received a signal from the U.S. that the U.S. and the Philippines will not invoke the treaty unless Chinese actions in the South China Sea result in the death of a Philippine serviceman, and only at the confrontation, and that the confrontations do not involve the People's Liberation Army Navy. The problem with the U.S. imposing such conditions is that it establishes boundaries for the Chinese behavior and enhances China's ability to employ gray zone tactics through their maritime militia. The Chinese are aware that they can employ any strategy against the Philippines as long as it follows the broad U.S. outline without provoking a response from the U.S. The U.S. has made the Chinese clearly aware of the boundaries of their action before risking a war, so they are willing to push the limit, knowing that they have the advantage as long as they do not cross over the boundaries stated by the United States. This gives the option to the Chinese to act as aggressively as it chooses within the defined boundaries to maintain continuous pressure on the Philippines to eventually make the electorate weary and willing to elect a new government that is more amicable to China. The U.S. did not do any favors to the Philippines by clearly defining what would trigger the invocation of the defense treaty. The U.S. should have relied on strategic ambiguity to determine what would trigger a U.S. response, and should have acted more aggressively diplomatically to warn China of their actions, and operated more assertively militarily along with Philippine forces operating in the West Philippine Sea to raise the risk of China being too forceful towards the Philippines. President Marcos Jr. correctly identified China's strategy of buying goodwill, which politically serves as a stabilizing force, in their opinion. However, Secretary Antony Blinken lacked the necessary preparation to counter China, despite the U.S. providing more direct foreign investment in the region than any other country, and highlighting the political turmoil China is causing in the region.